for sharing. It's very fun to get to know you a little bit more in this way. Um, we're here to work, but we like to have a little fun in the midst of it all. And like I said, research says this means that we'll do our work even better together. So we are continuing as promised on the concert series, or concert series, the coaching series. Like I said, a little tired. Um, are you all seeing? You're not seeing the presentation, right?
No, we're seeing now we are.
Okay, great. All right. So quickly, we're going to go through a little update on the project that we had for program evaluation. I'll remind you what it is in a second if you don't remember. We had the research minute and the question of the month and the resource of the month. Reminders about the OSEP conference and the SPDIG national meeting. We'll get to the coaching series. The resource of the month, I have to say, is exciting. We have some people here who are always with us, but they're going to be presenting a great infographic. I'll also keep you in suspense about that. So the program evaluation update, you may recall once to twice a year, we have school psychology doctoral students at University of Denver do a project with us. And this time we had them review the evidence-based professional development worksheet that you complete for your annual performance report for program measure 1. And I just felt like we were getting some duplicative answers, which means we weren't asking the questions correctly, or we needed to differentiate, ask for different details, etc. So they looked through it. They read the research that we base our work on, and like Learning Forward and Guskey and Trivet and Dunst, and NERN/CSEP's work. So they looked over that. They looked over an example of a filled out worksheet, and they looked over the worksheet itself, and they gave us recommendations. And the whole idea is that we simplify those components so that they are valid, meaningful, and give us reliable scores from our contractor who looks over it. And so this is some of what they did. They gave us a new version that it's not that we're going to take it and use it whole cloth. We're going to work on it first. But so in their version, they replaced some vague descriptions with clear, observable expectations. They added verification tools, ways that you can verify what you're doing. Used plain language bullets instead of dense paragraph text, included score 4 exemplars. So this is what, if you're getting a score of 4, this is what you'd likely include. They balanced out the trainer and coach roles, which I think is great, especially with my PBIS background. I remember that was a big part of it. And they integrated citations and models like Dunstan, Trivet, and Guskey throughout, as opposed to just saying generally we're basing this work on the research. So this isn't the only time we'll go over this, but this is one example of how they changed some language. So B5, the component in the EBPD worksheet, is about trainer coaching, observation, and evaluation. So left is the before side, right is the after side. I think, yeah, that's exactly right. And so you can see how they took the language and they, in their perspective, I'll be interested in getting your perspective. They think it's a lot easier to understand and easier to respond to, kind of understanding the expectations. So their recommendations were to provide annotated examples. So for score 4 exemplars with side-by-side comparisons, develop reviewer and grantee training, which of course we do, but I'm sure there's more we can change and add to it. Pilot the revised rubric before full rollout. Certainly we would do that. And address self-scoring bias. So some validation. What we will do is, so this is, before I get to that actually, this is an example of, if you, sorry, I messed this slide up. Well, anyways, we'll show it to you later. So for in the rubric, when we say this is what a 4 would look like, they wanted to say, you would provide this, and this, as opposed to just right now, what we have is a written description that could be from a 4, right? It's just it's a made up exemplar description, and they're saying, okay, and this is what you should include or might include if you were going to earn a 4 for this component. So 2 more recommendations that they shared with us: review and grantee training and pilot the revised rubric before full rollout. So testing it, which we'll have to figure out how to do that. Probably could test it on first year initiatives, year 1 initiatives, since the contractor doesn't look at that yet. So that's probably where we would pilot it. All this to say, all of you will have a chance to look at any changes we are recommending or proposing before we go through with them. We'll get feedback from evaluators, from project directors, from project coordinators, from partners. We take all feedback, so we won't just run with the changes that they recommended. But I think it does move us toward an easier to understand expectations. And I think they're just some common sense changes that we were ready for. We have only made significant changes twice, and they weren't really that significant. So we've had this rubric and worksheet since 2012, and it was probably time. Before I go to the research minute, any questions about the evidence-based professional development rubric and worksheet and the work that the DU students did, or the scholars? Okay, I'm going to keep tracking so I can hand it over to our guests who are sharing their infographic. So research minute, question of the month, resource of the month. Oops, sorry. So this comes from, do you all remember Ripple? And actually, this is a good quiz. Does everyone remember what Ripple stands for? Nope. Okay. Research Partnership for Professional Learning. So it's the Annenberg, I can't remember what the second part of that word is, at Brown University is part of Ripple. They have a lot of different partners. CSEP now partners with them, or NERN, National Implementation Research Network, and others. It's great because they're into our stuff, right? They're doing research and they're doing analyses of other research that has to do with professional development or professional learning. I don't know how much these AI questions have to do with your work, but I thought it was kind of good context to know, since it's such a big conversation, a big change just in our world generally. So what Ripple did was, beginning in November 2023, they interviewed AI researchers, developers, professional learning providers, district personnel, to look at how are organizations and districts currently using AI for teacher professional learning. What potential future applications do stakeholders see for AI and teacher professional learning? And what are the key challenges stakeholders are facing with regard to AI and teacher professional learning? So I personally am most interested in AI for coaching because it's the most expensive thing that we do, right? Direct observations for fidelity and other outcomes is also expensive, but coaching is usually done more frequently and potentially for longer periods of time. And so that's where AI is most interesting to me. I don't think it's quite there yet. There's some good basic uses, but it's not like you can replace a coach with AI at this point at all. So here's some of Ripple's findings. That was just my interest. Among teachers, the concern is using the tools well and safely to create good learning experiences and broader support structures. They want professional learning about AI. And leaders and developers want professional learning with AI. So how are teachers using AI? They're using it to generate course content, to facilitate student engagement, to differentiate and translate course materials to increase accessibility, to diagnose student needs so they can use data-driven instruction, to provide feedback on student work, and to communicate with parents and family members regarding campus events or individual student progress. I think this is an interesting list because something like communicating with parents and family members, like I can see how that would really help you get your drafts going and then you would revise more. Providing feedback on student work gets a little more challenging. Diagnosing student needs to support data-driven. Again, like most of these are like good beginnings, but then you get differentiating course materials. I'd be interested in seeing that, like how well AI is able to do this, that at this point. So what supports do they need? The interview participants highlighted the need for two specific types of professional learning intended to support the effective use of AI to reduce teacher burden. So they wanted general AI literacy, and they wanted practice with AI tools. And they wanted to get a sense of the advantages and disadvantages of specific tools and use cases. Digital Promise does have this framework for AI literacy that might be useful. And then, to summarize, teachers want to know how to use AI, when to use AI, when not to use AI, and how to be discerning about the content it creates. So there was also a case study about incorporating AI in district professional learning infrastructure. And the big takeaway from this case study was the co-construction of things. So they created guidelines in this district and they brought on teachers, school and district leaders, folks who really knew about technology, folks who really knew the coursework to work together in creating them. They prioritized fostering engagement and understanding. And they gave people informal opportunities, including games and contests and drop-in office hours with, to try things out, to get comfortable. They also had formal engagements with structured professional learning sessions. So there is that stakeholder representation or engaging critical perspectives. And then this is district leader guidance. You should have district policies around AI, align the technology and professional learning infrastructure. So they don't necessarily need to stay separately, show people how they fit together. The Council of Great City Schools has this tool, K-12 Generative AI Readiness Checklist. Dedicating time for AI literacy, beware of misleading claims, which some of that list of how teachers are using them makes me think of misleading claims. Take a balanced approach. So thinking about what unique contribution teachers make or coaches, to our earlier conversation. And also we need teachers to be able to be efficient. Invest in technology leadership. Who's going to be leading, who's supporting, thinking about that part of the infrastructure, and monitoring implementation, making sure you know what's happening throughout the district. So questions about the case study or the interviews, and what does all this mean for your project? Anything at all? I'm not sure. I'm curious.
I'm going to jump in. So I've appreciated that at our national meetings for a couple or few years now, we have had the topic of AI floating around, and it becomes more of a topic every time we meet. And we have people in our SPDG network who are involved with exploring AI to assist with our projects. AI right now is a limited role in our work in Minnesota because we're still trying to figure out how exactly it can help us do our work after quite recently getting over ambivalence about AI within the education community and state government. But this network has been actually for me instrumental in giving me access to what other people are doing with AI and how it might help with everything from data collection, management, evaluation to some of the more constructive uses that we just saw on the screen here. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Tom. Yeah, it doesn't seem like we're getting more personnel anytime soon, or, so how can we um how can we help the personnel we have? How can we support them and how can we make them most effective? Others' thoughts?
This is Courtney, and our I work for a state education agency, and our state education agency that is opting to take a very conservative approach to AI. So this is actually off the table for us.
Okay. Yeah. In, full disclosure, federal government, or at least Department of Education as well. As of yet, you can request access, but it's not, I currently with that, because I haven't requested access, I'm not able to do so.
I will say with our project, we tried to somewhat not necessarily get ahead of it, because I feel like we're continuously behind it. But trying to figure out that if teachers are already going to be using it anyway, how can we help them? Again, that media literacy, data literacy piece of it, help them use it in a more responsible way, but also knowing that, for example, there are IEP pieces out there and they still have to understand the process of writing an IEP to actually effectively help in
Yes.
certain cases. But we also see it as, if we are working with an individual district, finding out, do they even recommend for their teachers to use it? Because we don't want to be talking with the teachers about something that a district is going to say that is not something we recommend our teachers to do. So I think that there's still a lot of, people are very nervous about it, rightfully so. But I do think that it could potentially be good, and it's not going away. So, but I saw somebody talk about the UDL book from Novak, and we bought that for our whole team as well, with AI, and we've been very pleased. We had Novak at a national meeting, but we've been contracting with them for UDL trainings and all of those pieces, and have been very happy with them. So,
oh, that's great,
where we are
because
with
I
it.
think it's almost meta. Oh gosh, I can't think of the word. Maybe I'll just say meta. It's almost meta, like, because UDL is all about building things to be accessible from the beginning. And so you want to build AI to be accessible from the beginning to everyone. So that's a great idea. And actually, Stephanie, this is a great lead in. Stephanie, Laura, and Sherry, are you here too?
I don't think that I saw
I don't see her
Sherry.
either. Okay,
on.
so Stephanie and Laura are here. Stephanie is the project coordinator and Laura is the project evaluator from the Illinois SPDIG. And they have shared before their fidelity journey. This is not about that, although it could connect to it. This is the resource of the month, and specifically it's their infographic for their project. And we love getting your infographics. So if you have one you haven't shared with myself and John yet, please send it in and we'll put it on the infographic page. So do you want to share your screen? Is that okay, Stephanie?
Yes, I absolutely can. And I also put the document in the chat as well, so that
Okay,
you
I
can
see
see it. We really took, when I went to the national meeting and so many people sharing their infographics and their visualizations and all of that, it was just wonderful to quickly see and all of that. And we also talked about it in one of the forums, just about to quickly share your impact. And we're nearing the end of our grant cycle. And so we wanted to quickly be able to show our stakeholders, anyone who really wants to know kind of the impact that we've had. And so this infographic is specific to our data cycle. So as soon as June 30th hits, we will create another one that goes with the school year, because many of our districts that we work with, they want to see kind of a school year. It makes a little bit more sense in their mind, but this goes specifically with our data cycle. And so we talked with our team, things that they would want to see. So this kind of started back in February of what could we really highlight? What did we want to highlight? And so we used some specific data from our APR. So those top percentages minus the 100%, but the other ones are directly from our APR and some of our program measures that go directly again with our objectives. from our grant as well. And then also just looking at who we're serving. This also served as a great conversation with our team that we are using the data that they are submitting to us, because sometimes that can be just a lot for them to submit all of their events and their conversations and all of that, but we are using that, and it does show impact and our reach throughout the state. I do also want to point out, when we're talking about PD participants, we don't currently have anything that is asynchronous. So all of that is either in person or virtual events that we are hosting. It's mainly our team that are doing all of those things. We do contract out with some people, but it is typically our team that is doing that. But we just kind of wanted to be able to show quickly what we're doing. And that really is what it is. So we shared it with Jennifer to potentially share out. We've shared it with the state, and Sherry very quickly shared it out with the state too, because we just want to show what our reach is. And then what we also want to do is kind of use this for a template and put our entire years together as well, to kind of just show a compilation of everything that we have done. So
Yeah.
that is.
And
I know
Stephanie,
an
how does it
infographic here.
feel to see everything on one page after
Oh my
years of work?
gosh.
Yeah.
It was absolutely fantastic. And also on the Canva, this was in Canva that we did this, and the graphs are somewhat hard to see on the paper. If you print it, they're much easier, but you can click on each of them and it does expand it for those individual graphs as well. But it was great for us. Again, we say kudos to our team all of the time, but seeing this was just, oh my gosh, look at all of those kind of things. It also really made us look at one of our objectives really has to do with family engagement, and we don't have anything on here that is as specific to family engagement that we would want it to be. It's encompassed with other things, but we want to be able in the next year to find something that we can highlight that says family engagement. We have highlighted all of our other objectives in here, but we haven't really said something that's specific to family engagement. So we want to make sure, and that really made us look even harder as what do we need to do that can be a big highlight on this infographic in that next year too. So it helped us to look at it that way as well. Laura, do you have anything that you want to add in there?
No, not really. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, which is what we want it to be. I think if you had any questions about it, then it's not met its goal. I think that what we want to do is just present the information and have people think, oh, gee, this looks great. I think my district needs to partner with IESE Network.
Yeah, great. Well, this is, yeah, love it. Wonderful. 97% of the the teachers who partnered with IESE received professional learning from them, stayed in the profession. So that's a really great impact. And as I always say, it's something I can share with Congress. It's something I can share with our leadership. And certainly I know it's something great to share, not just with your internal staff, but with your legislators and with your department leadership. So thank you, Stephanie and Laura, for being willing to share
You're
it
welcome.
and the link for everyone.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for sharing your AI resources in the chat as well. I mean, it's so fun. Like there's just so many things and everyone's trying something different. And so I love it when we get to share. So I'm about to introduce or have them introduce themselves, our presenters. Quick reminder, this Friday is a Fidelity Friday. It's going to be on the topic of, and just one second, I'll get it to the right display. On the topic of analyzing and using your Fidelity data. I also dipped back a bit into the adaptations in Fidelity just because I wasn't done with the topic. So I'm the presenter, I guess I can do that. The OSEP conference, if you haven't already signed up, remember, you can have 5 people from your SEA or lead agency come, because Part C 619 should be there, Part B should be there. If your SPDIG person is part of that 5-person team, you can bring someone else from the SPDIG. It could be, if it's not your project coordinator or it's not, someone on the immediate team, then it can be one of your partners who's not already coming. So do think about having someone represent you there. The theme for the SPDIG National Meeting is optimizing dissemination, developing partnerships, and showing impact. But we're going to start that theme at the OSEP conference. And so if you're going, our planning committee has some great stuff in store for you. There's a scavenger hunt. Of course, we're going to have a social gathering as we always do. So be on the lookout for those directions, and then it'll carry through to the SPDIG National Meeting. And now I want to turn it over to our coaching series presenters. They're going to be talking about coaching and early intervention. And we have Rachel Schachter and Sue Bainter, and they are going to tell you about either their first concert or a memorable recent concert. Not Laura. No, I saw Laura. Rachel and Sue, welcome. We're glad you're with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having us. I'll introduce myself. I'm Rachel Schachter. I am an associate professor in the College of Education at the University of Illinois, Chicago. I used to be at the University of Nebraska, which is where we started this work I was there for most of the time we did this work. So I preemptively put this in the chat, but my first concert was actually a Neil Diamond concert that I went to with my family times. Sue, do you want to introduce yourself while I try to share our screen, our slides?
Sue Bainter, and I work for the University of Nebraska, or excuse me, I contract with the University of Nebraska and also the Nebraska Department of Ed. So I've kind of a foot in both places, which has been really good for this project. But I'm an occupational therapist by trade, so I've worked in the school system for over 30 years, and just got my master's degree in special ed and decided to do something else. And coaching is really my passion. So I've totally enjoyed this project. And my husband is a big fan of Sting. So the first concert we went to was Police, but we've been to Sting concerts as well, and thoroughly enjoyed it.
So fun. And I hope Rachel and Sue, I forgot to ask you this at the beginning. Would you mind if every once in a while I ask you a question or make a comment
No,
to help
please.
folks
We're
connect it
very
with our work? Okay, great. Thank you.
informal. Please feel free to ask questions. And we should say, there is another member of our team on the call today, Summer Fossick, who makes all the things happen. So shout out to Summer. We won't make her say her first concert though. Well, welcome everyone. So as is introduced, we're here to talk about our project, Coaching and Early Intervention. Sue, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so our project actually has a multi-layer partners that we just want to take a minute to thank, and particularly the families and the early intervention teams and those supporting those groups supporting them, their administrators, planning region teams, which I'll tell you about in a little bit. As Rachel said, the grant was actually awarded to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Nebraska Center for Research on Children, Youth, Families in the Schools, which is very well known in Nebraska for the research they're doing, not only in early childhood, but school age as well. A great team of evaluators, and we feel very lucky to have them in our state and have partnered with them on this work. As I said, I also contract with the Nebraska Department of Education Early Development Network. Amy Bonnell, Cole Johnson, and Jessica Anthony are the coordinators of that work. And then we have some state coaches that were part of the project that are also part of do the work that I do, which is training and technical assistance for early interventionists. So let us first define for you the context in which we implemented or worked on, I should say, this project. I believe we were when the grants were awarded, we were the sole award grantee that were whose project was early intervention. So our focus was, or is, because we're just still in that last year, home-based services. So just like in many other states, we were able to work with a variety of providers on early intervention teams. So speech pathologists, early childhood special ed teachers, OTs and PTs, services coordinators. And in Nebraska, the services coordinator is a dedicated position, meaning that that's their sole role. In some other states, it's a combo with some of the other professions. They are the sort of the single point of contact, if you're not familiar with services coordinator, single point of contact to assist and support families who are just getting started with this early intervention special ed system with their child with a disability. So very important to the team. And then just to sort of define some unique things about service delivery with children who are on IFSPs, and that is that they learn in context. So we can't send an infant or toddler with a disability off to do their lessons in walking or their lessons in talking. We know from the literature for many years that they learn best in context. And so for that reason, we have to, and we want to include families in our focus, because young children, we know, need familiar people, familiar things from their home, the familiar places that they go. And in particular, their learning is organized into the routines and daily learning opportunities that their family has available to them. So that sort of defines the focus of the population that we were wanting to influence or impact with our coaching and early intervention. And next, I'll talk about Nebraska's context. So we have, well, just a couple things about the state of Nebraska. So 1.8 million people, which probably as compared to some of your other states might not be that much. We have the metro region over on the right side, the box, which is the highly populated area. And then, as we like to say, everything else is west. And the population and the resources and so forth, as you go farther west, become further and farther and few between. So we definitely have a mix of rural and urban areas. Those of you who might have some familiarity with the early intervention system know that there's a federal requirement that we have interagency coordinating councils whose role is to advise and assist the early intervention system in providing appropriate services for young children. And that includes professional development and child find and all the things that support the early intervention work. In Nebraska, we call them planning region teams, and we have 27 of them. So that's what those numbers are. And they receive funding through the state, federal funds through the state, depending upon their population and referral numbers. We, just like every other state in the nation, had to develop a plan of ways that we were going to use in evidence-based improvement strategies to improve outcomes for children, and known as results-driven accountability. And so that's the way that we organized our focus for this coaching work. We chose as our improvement strategies routines-based interviews with, if you're not familiar with them, Remember I said young children learn best through routines. And so this is a technique or a structured interview that helps families describe the kinds of routines or not that each family interacts with and has is part of each part of the child's life. We develop functional and meaningful outcomes, IFSP outcomes from the RBI. And then we also were able to, again, through the Nebraska Center for Research on Children and Families in the Schools, we're able to access them for our other improvement strategy, which is the Getting Ready approach. And that approach has been around for quite a while, probably has more research behind it than the RBI, but was a very well what I want to say, connected well to the RBI, because we were able to use partnerships with families to use those outcomes that came from the RBI to guide the home visits, and focus in particular on parent-child interaction, which we know is one of the most direct ways to improve child outcomes. So as each region got trained in these improvement strategies, we also had them assign local coaches so that the early intervention professionals could be supported back in their home regions. But I will say before the coaching project came along, that those local coaches really didn't do a lot of actual coaching per se, as we will be describing it. They were more, there were annual fidelity checks, but it was more like kind of a stamp of approval. You know, you did this right, you did this wrong, and I'll see you next year. So not a lot of evidence probably behind what we were doing. And then there were state level coaches, as I've mentioned too, that were responsible for supporting those local coaches. Coaching itself there are a lot of projects in the state of Nebraska that use coaching in a variety of different ways. And so that's another thing that was probably a little muddled, if you will, in terms of how the coaching practices were used. Another thing that this project had to be, or another characteristic that this project had to be aware of. But what was really timely was that this grant was awarded about the time that all of the regions were trained in these improvement strategies, and we were at the point where we wanted to really focus on, okay, now that we've got everybody trained, they're using the improvement strategies, how are we going to help them sustain those positive results that we were going for? So coincidentally, it was a very important time in the space where the place where the Nebraska was in terms of implementing evidence-based strategies. So I think we want to pause here for a minute before we get into the nitty-gritty of the coaching itself, and have you think about and put in the chat kind of from what you've heard so far, what might be some things that you want to learn or take away, kind of allow you an opportunity to set your intentions before we get into those specifics. So I think we're going to give you a couple minutes now to go ahead and put that in the chat box.
Yeah, and just knowing that this might be a very different context than what you're used to thinking about with the home-based birth to 3 population.
I just want to say hi. This is Anita on the call, the project officer for your grant. And I am so glad that you guys are sharing this. And I hope all of the SPDIG projects can find some context. This is a fantastic question to ask because I think that there's so much value that you guys, I don't know, values, there's so much value, content that you could bring and that can be applied. So I look forward to seeing what people respond.
Oh, Veronica, I see you have your hand raised. Do you want to?
I'm ready to ask if we're chatting yet, so I'll wait.
Oh, you can chat it. Whatever makes the most
No,
sense.
yeah, Veronica, we love your voice. Talk to us.
You, Deborah. Well, what I'm so excited about is that Colorado Department of Education, we just got our comprehensive literacy grant, just got awarded, and it's very similar to the early literacy grant, but you could really do the whole span of the child. So there's actually a birth to kinder portion of this grant that my San Luis Valley BOCES got awarded that grant. And we have a huge early childhood council that works one-on-one with kids. And I have some good friends that are working in that area. So I'm just excited to learn about how that could help support my area and my neck of the woods. So thank you.
Oh, wonderful. It's interesting. We have a member, most of the team is early child, and we have a member of our team who has done a lot of coaching, but more in secondary STEM. And she always talked about how just how different early childhood is, I think, personality wise, and just the kind of community wise. So it is I don't know, it's just interesting to think about that. And some of this coaching work has been going on for a long time in early childhood. So in some ways, the early childhood community is much more amenable to coaching because that's been a format we've been using for a long time.
Yeah, and also really thinking about who are our early childhood educators. They're heroes. There are people who, they might not have a college background or any kind of education background, and they come into this space because they love children, and how can we support them with best practices that they might not even know are out there. So very excited.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I see a lot in the chat just about some of data, some evidence-based practices, the process of coaching in early childhood, being in different kinds of contexts. I'm trying to do my best synthesizing of chat. So I'm hoping I think there's a lot here that people can take away, even if the context feels a little bit outside of your norm. So we thought
There
we
was
would.
one question, Rachel, just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the question was, how willing were early childhood folks about coaching? And I think you kind of answered it. You said
Oh,
it's
yeah.
what you've been doing for a while, but I just wanted to make sure it was explicitly
Yeah.
answered.
Thank you, Jennifer. I did see that. I'm going to get to that in just a minute. It is that the buy-in and willingness are always a huge part of professional learning, as we know. But before I get to that, and this is actually part of it, what we thought we would do for this presentation, after laying the context for you, is to tell you what our takeaways from the project are related to coaching, so that you can see how we built that into the project. But it was kind of this was a study that allowed us to do some kind of iterative development and really build out the infrastructure across the state. And so these are kind of the takeaways that we have, and we hope to demonstrate to you how we did that or what we learned about that through the rest of the presentation. So one of the big takeaways, and this may feel obvious, but I think in action it's actually not very obvious, is that coaches need support and guidance to effectively implement coaching that benefits children. And so as you mentioned, there were coaches in the state, but there was not a cohesive infrastructure to support coaches. And I mean that in multiple ways in terms of coach training, coach time, coach money. This was often coaching was added on as another part of someone's job. So there wasn't compensation for that work. And really, there wasn't a lot of, I said this, but I think it's really important, training on how to do coaching, right? We spent a lot of time training on the evidence-based practices, but not as much training on the work of coaching. And the other thing that's part of this support is having a clear and unified vision for what coaching is, or what the coaching is meant to accomplish. And so we have a lot, there's a lot of coaching in Nebraska, but when you talk to different people, there's a different vision for what coaching is and what the coaching is meant to accomplish. So one of the things that was really important in the work we were able to do was to create a system, a structure for coaching that included both these kinds of infrastructural pieces, as well as a clear, cohesive purpose and vision for coaching across those many, many PRTs. Another main takeaway is that coaching is more than relationship building. Lisa Kanoki, who's not here today, was the PI for this project, and I have spent a lot of time thinking about this, because when you what does that mean? When you talk to coaches, they always talk about relationships, and I'm not trying to undervalue the importance of relationships, but relationships cannot be the only thing that coaches are doing. And so a lot of the work that we did and we'll talk about this later, in preparing coaches and thinking about what evidence-based coaching practices are, is moving beyond relationships to doing the work of coaching. And in early childhood, we emphasize relationships, right? So relationships are a key part of the work that everyone is doing. And so sometimes we have to push even harder to move beyond relationships. And then finally, data, and there are lots of comments about data. Data, coaching and data are inextricably linked. But some of the things we had to think about around data were, first of all, what is data? In a birth to 3 home-based context, data, and it really conceptualizing what those data are, and what we might capture around data, might be different than what we typically think about. We're in early childhood, birth to 3 in particular, we're thinking a lot about interactions as the data. So if that's our data, how do we get those data? How do we get the data we need to do successful coaching? And then how do we move from gathering data to using that data to make coaching meaningful and make practices meaningful? And so really, these are the 3 kind of big takeaways that kind of came from the work that we're doing around a coaching support and infrastructure, really thinking about coaching practices, and also thinking about using data in a meaningful and successful way. So let's see if I can make my slides move. I want to show you, so one of the first things we needed to do, I'm just going to show you, remember this map? And then we're doing different kinds of evidence-based practices, and there are coaches. And one of the things we wanted to do was to build a structure for coaching within the state. And so I'm going to work backwards. So remember, the outcome is to support children and families, right? To enhance outcomes for children by working with their families. And so we have these professionals, I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, who are you can't see my mouse. Okay, well, in my mind, I'm pointing towards those early intervention personnel on my screen. And those are the people who are working with families, right? Those are the ones who are doing the evidence-based practices of routines-based interviews, and the getting ready practices, and they're working directly with families. So that was really in place. And then occasionally, prior to CEI, early intervention personnel might interact with a coach, and the frequency and duration of that was variable. And again, the coaching what the coaching was also variable, but often towards a fidelity or a check-in kind of lens. And so with the CEI project, what we did was built in particular, these other levels of coaching. So each early intervention personnel, I'm sorry, I don't know if you can hear my dog, the male in the person has arrived and he's very agitated. So the early intervention personnel all got a coach. And the coach was then meant to not only do fidelity checks and build relationships, but actually help the early intervention personnel enhance their practices such that they could then improve the outcomes for children and family. But we also added another layer, knowing that coaches, people who are going to be coaches, needed support as well. And so we created we created what we call state level coaches. And so these are individuals who coached our site-based coaches on coaching. So we've created a structure, a nested structure where each layer gets some kind of support and in particular coaching. And what you don't see on the edge here is Sue as our master coach coaching our state level coaches. And then as part of the structure, you can see the data is a key part of the structure and the coaching is driven by feedback. So we created this infrastructure that incorporated a lot of what was already happening in the state, but made it more systematic, made it more uniform, and gave it more of a universal or unifying view of coaching. In particular, one of our challenges, not a challenge, but one of our opportunities was to help people shift their thinking about coaching as checking for fidelity to coaching towards enhancing practices. And so we spent a lot of time talking with folks about that aspect of the project. So as we mentioned, that we have our different layers of coaching, which as you can imagine, made for lots of fun conversations in terms of differentiating the level of coaching. We created a unifying view of coaching. And then we did some other things to build this structure for coaching. One was we created, because of the grant, we were able to support coaches to do the work of coaching, to pay them stipends to participate in the training and then to participate in the coaching process. We, instead of, we worked collaboratively, I would say, with PRTs to identify region areas that were ready to participate in the CEI project and who were willing to participate in the CEI project. So it was not, it was really, does everyone want to do this? Is your team ready? Are you going to really set aside the time and the space for folks to participate? Because as we know, buy-in is really important. And so creating that, making that part of our project was really important for us, and we think important for creating the system that was successful. Sue, did you want to add anything to that, Sue? Okay. So we're building out this structure, and in addition to the coaching, we also added other layers of support. We also created professional learning communities so that folks could talk across coaching levels. So we had professional PLCs for our site coaches so they could all come together and talk. We have PLCs for our state coaches, and so that they could talk across region PRTs and with each other and build out their professional learning. Another piece of, so this is basically the coaching implementation model. And what you see in the, this is what it would be for a site coach. So a site coach would have a training, and then they'd have a coaching conversation, and then they would check in. And so this is the person who's working with a provider who then work with the family. But you can see that there's a high level dosage for coaching, with lots of touch points for the coach to connect with their coach, if that makes sense. But what also we did was recognize that these are real people with real lives. And so these were somewhat flexible in terms of when the coach and the coachee could meet to set their meetings and interact with each other. So flexibility, we're creating structure, but also flexibility within the structure so that we can make sure everyone is successful. So just in case you're curious, some of our PLC topics were about relationship building, because coaches were still very concerned about relationship building, even though we wanted them to think beyond relationship building. And Susan going to talk about our coaching practices in a moment, but that was still something that coaches felt they wanted training on, so we provided it. Some of our coaches were working with multiple coachees. So how do you support someone to support multiple coachees who have different personalities and different needs? Modeling, practicing coaching, how to give feedback. So really more in depth on coaching. And I will say that the bulk of the work we did in CEI, even though getting ready and routines-based interviews were key parts of our project, we spent a lot of time helping people do the work of coaching, because the state does a wonderful job training people on the evidence-based practices. And so what we really wanted to do was to train people on how to help people implement the evidence-based practices. So there was a lot of the project was focused on the work of coaching. All right. Sue, you're muted if you
Whoops, I see that. So the coaching practices, when I describe them to you, are not going to be unfamiliar. But as Rachel said, there were people were using coaching in a variety of different ways, and so we very much needed a structure, some consistency across coaches, and this was actually developed to help coaches and coachees think about this continuous improvement cycle that we were, that was kind of how we referred to what we hope to have happen, and to be able to give people an idea of the kinds of, the coaches in particular, the kinds of processes and tools, which I will also be talking about here in a little bit, that would help them provide that structure, and help them plan, and help them create a way of interacting with coachees that fostered not only the relationship, but also for the coachee to be able to develop their own goals and the steps that they wanted to take. So I'm going to be, in a minute here, I'm going to be talking about the practices first, the coaching practices first, and then the tools that were developed as part of this project. And that I will just stray from the PowerPoint a little bit here, in that we have taken over the training and coaching work that we learned from the CEI project, and are using all of these tools now as part of our Nebraska Department of Education training and technical assistance. And everybody has been very excited about them, and I think it's really created a process that almost anybody can get into and start to help them think about, instead of what's this nebulous thing called coaching, and how can I instead plan for it and apply it in a way that's useful. So let's talk about.
Can I interject something really quickly? One of the things that we've talked about when it comes to thinking about how you leverage your SPDIG in your state, I'm talking to everyone now, leveraging your SPDIG, one of the best ways I've seen projects do that is take their coaching work and either replicate their coaching work in other initiatives or share coaches across initiatives. But you don't need a different coaching model for every single aspect. And it might not be just your model, maybe you're blending it with something else. You know, it might not be pristinely what you created. But the thing that you're making me think, Rachel and Sue, is how much easier you make that to leverage your coaching work or your other professional development work when you have specific touch points that have resources associated with them. Because it's like, well, this is what you do, and you have this thing that you use, and this is what, you know, and I like that it's not overwhelming, right? Like this, I feel like I could step into it and probably figure it out, even if I hadn't been prepared. So I just wanted to editorialize for a minute and also bring us back to some of what we're trying to do for SPDIGs in states.
Oh, Jennifer, I think that's a really good point, because one of the things that as we were starting to put the coaching together, we realized we needed so many more structures that we had implicit in our mind about what should be happening. But by creating these tools, which Sue will talk about, we were able to really I can't now use the word structure, but guide how the coaching was going to happen and make sure everyone was on the same page about what should be happening, while also supporting the coaching process. And these are certainly things that, although specific to our intervention, can be modified to a certain extent and put in other places. And we definitely heard from our participants that they were applying parts of this into their other work across or into their interactions, not necessarily coaching interactions, but supervisors, you know, so there's a lot of generalizability across these pieces of the work. Yeah. I'm gonna go to the next slide, Sue. Is that okay?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
So these are the coaching practices, and as I said, I'm sure none of these terms and descriptions will be anything different than you have not, anything that you're unfamiliar with. Relationships, of course, interwoven amongst the entire coaching process. I mean, I think that could probably really be the foundation. And we've kind of mentioned the fact that we wanted our coaching to go to build on from relationships, but not just stay there. Goal setting and joint planning, I often describe that as kind of the bookends, if you will, of a coaching continuum or coaching session, because all of our coaches started a coaching session with, okay, now what was your goal? What were the steps that you were going to take since we were together the last time? And how did that go? And then I'm also finishing up my coaching session by revisiting that based on the conversation that I've had in between, or as part of that coaching session, and either set a new goal or keep the same one and perhaps change the steps. But that really held both the coach and the coachee accountable for what would happen between the end of one coaching session and the beginning of the other. Really created that nice continuum that allowed for more intentional, more mutual, kind of keeping the coachee's eye on the ball, so to speak. If I'm working hard on asking open-ended questions as part of a routines-based interview, and that's my goal, because I've revisited that at the beginning of my session and we've talked about it. We've decided where we're going to go from here. That really helps make the target of the coaching intentional and explicit. We, of course, use the coach used observations as their data. As Rachel said, I think one of the things that we had to realize in early intervention is that what is our data? I'm watching this person do a home visit, or I'm watching her do an RBI. What are the the implementation behaviors that she's using that match up with how we know that strategy needs to be implemented. Modeling was probably one of the coaching practices that was probably underused. And I think that the reason for that is that people were not necessarily comfortable with the intentionality that goes into that. So in true modeling, the coach and the coachee have decided that the coachee wants to see it in action, and so there's a conversation that happens before the coachee demonstrates. There's a conversation afterwards. What did you see? And now it's your turn to try it. So making, again, bringing in that intentionality piece was really important. And I think this particular practice could probably use in our work, could probably use more practice, to use a word that I've used already. Reflection and feedback are, of course, we want our coaches to get to the point where they are able to reflect on their own. And one of the ways of getting to that point is that as the coach, I'm prompting my coachees to think about how is this different than what I have done in the past, or what do I need to do next, or what kind of actions am I going to take to make this happen, and what do I need to be able to do that? Feedback, of course, is helping the coachee develop new information, new ways of thinking about things, by the coach connecting information to what the coachee already knows. And then, as Rachel has mentioned, we really needed to infuse data and making database decisions, and recognizing, I guess, what the data is, what the data in early intervention is all about. So it of course looks like a linear list of coaching practices, and yet each coach uses these practices in a slightly different way with each coachee that they are interacting with differently in terms of that continuum that I talked about. So very driven by each unique coach and coachee dyad.
Yeah, and I just want to point out that as a reminder, we're not just talking about coaching the people that are working with families, but this also, those coaches were getting their own coaching, right? So the state coaches were using those coaching practices to coach the site-based coaches, who would then use those to coach the early intervention personnel. And so there was this kind of parallel structure, so that everyone was learning the same things and then seeing them implemented, right? So we're learning by modeling and experiencing. And so the data and the observations that a state coach and a site-based coach would use would be an actual coaching session. And they can look at the site-based coach's coaching session to give them feedback so that they can improve their practice with the early intervention personnel. And I'm keeping my eye on our time. It went by much faster than we had planned. But I just want to, I think, and thinking about the structure and thinking about data, we created a lot of these tools that would help with the observations to inform the coaching conversations. So Sue, I don't know if you want to go through them like super fast, or what do you?
Okay. So an observation tool helps the coach characterize and think about what did I see? Did it match up with what we know to be the practices within each of those improvement strategies? So I have a way of documenting. In particular, I'm looking for the strengths that this coachee has. And then I used these observations, and this was a tool that everybody really loved, because we can't just we can't just take a bunch of observations and march into a coaching session without thinking about how am I going to organize this information in a way that supports the coachee's goal, that prioritizes strengths, that uses strengths to think about what the opportunities they have that they might have for making the changes that they would like to make. So again, in the past, it was all about, yes, you did this, no, you didn't, yes, you did this. And this particular tool really helped us think about, okay, you wanted to do this differently. So here's some questions I might ask you. Here's some observations that I'm going to share, all framed in a way that supports the targeted goal that I, as the coachee, am trying to achieve.
Yeah, and you'll see we even put in here, by we I mean Sue, put in this column where they could think about the feedback that they would give. So preparing for the coaching conversation, and then they could write out their questions as well. And so again, this is moving the coach to think beyond relationships, to think to beyond present absence of practice, to how can I use my coaching strategies to improve what the coachee is doing. We also created a tool that had reflection questions and reflection prompts on it, and
yes,
I love that.
Yes.
The other big structural piece was figuring out how to even map out a coaching conversation, right, Sue? And so we created this agenda where we help them think about how to put together the coaching practices, how to structure the conversation. So structure at every level was really important within this project.
Right.
And moving
multiple places in this agenda to make sure that I'm always getting the input from my coachee, so that there's a mutuality as well.
Correct. And this, yeah.
So let's look at the last one. And then the last part of that agenda, after we've reflected on our observations, we've used reflection and feedback, we've developed some possibilities for where we're going to go next. Now let's put it down on paper. And not only, as I said, revisiting the goal, but what steps will I take as the coachee? And also what steps might the coach take? And the intent was for this to be developed jointly and mutually. And I think the fact that we were able to use this document or this tool to prompt that really, again, helped hold people accountable for where they were headed and the kinds of things that they wanted to have happen.
And then they would revisit this beginning of the next session.
Yes.
Guide. That was part of the opening part of the agenda, and then we could use it subsequently across coaching sessions. So we were going to do breakout rooms, but I'm not sure that we have.
Yeah, I think it's probably too late. But Rachel and Sue, could you is there a place where folks could access these resources, these tools?
I have our contact information, and so I think that you can contact Lisa, and we can share some of these tools that way. Yeah, that's a great question. So maybe let's just take 1 minute for a self-reflection, and just pick one of these questions that feels relevant to your work, in particular about the system level supports that are available to you, or is there an ongoing vision for coaching, a very cohesive vision of coaching that you have in your own project, I guess, for lack of a better word, and is that a place for enhancement for yourself or your project? You don't have to. If someone feels excited to put it in the chat, they're welcome to. Otherwise, we can. Well, thank you, Anita, for putting the website in. It is at the end too, but yeah. Okay. do want to share a little bit of evidence around the implementation. So, anecdotally, we've shared a few things, but I do want to show you that evidence around how this has been implemented, both in terms of the practice outcomes related to the project as well as participant experiences, because it's particularly important for us as we think about maintaining this work and the the feasibility and usability and long-term uptake of this work. So what we found was that 100% of all the coaching practices that we taught coaches were used in the coaching conversations, and all of our participants reported improved knowledge of coaching practices, which again, is if you think about not having a lot of dedicated coach training, we found this to be very promising and positive. Not in the project, dedicated coach training prior to the project. Our coaches had a lot to say about their coaching, but let me just read you a couple. The biggest difference, I think, is the really intentional joint action or the action plan. That piece is in particular got broke down more and more intentional, just more intentionality behind it, and maybe like, will there be a difference for your families? You know, if you do this, how will it impact your work essentially? Like I wasn't asking those kinds of questions before. So here you can see this coach kind of reflecting on moving beyond more of the superficial work to helping their coachee think more deeply about the work they were doing, why they were doing that work, and would it impact the families they were working with. So this idea of intentionality in planning, probably this coach thought relationships was the most important part of coaching and has moved beyond that. And the other quote, really being mindful of the open-ended questions, the reflective questions to get to them to where I think they can get, but to get them there on their own, so to speak, using questions. So again, really helping create opportunities for the coachees to learn and enhance their practice. And the coaches are being more reflective about what they were doing. And then they also really liked having a coach. Sometimes you're out there alone in the world coaching, and you don't get any feedback on the coaching that you're doing. So honestly, like having a coach, and then it has made me step up my game because I know that I have that support and someone holding me accountable, having to actually pause, reflect together. What's meaningful has just been really increased my practice, right? So this idea of having a coach was really helpful and beneficial for those doing the work of coaching. We also found, we spent a lot of time thinking about the coaches and the coaching, but ultimately we also observed increased use or enhanced use of the evidence-based practice. So our coaches were able to do these practices, the coachees, the providers were able to do these practices with high levels of fidelity. So not only were we helping them think and reflect on their practice, but they were also doing the practices at a high level. And the providers also liked having coaching, right? We know that people typically like having coaching, and this is evidenced here too. I felt like I improved during the home visits, and having worked with a coach, the action strategies that we set up, I felt like it made me improve, right? So having this action planning helped the coachees feel like they were improving. And then additionally, we collected satisfaction data. Everyone was satisfied with the coaching supports. They liked the PLCs. They liked the resources. Having a coach to reflect on my own coaching practices has been such a gift. The opportunities to meet together and grow together on a regularly scheduled basis, but not too often, just enough, has really been beneficial. So finding that balance between enough and not enough is also something to continue to tweak, I think. The professionals were 100% satisfied with the quality, and families were 100% satisfied with their professionals' efforts.
Rachel and Sue, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
One of the pieces of data you shared is that the coaches you observed used all of the coaching practices that you had provided training on. And one of those areas was modeling. And we've always found with the SPDIG, and I think this plays out in research, but I can't think of which research has talked about it, that modeling is the toughest practice to get coaches to do. And so I'm just wondering if you could reflect on why you think you may have been successful in that.
So this was coach reports in their logs. So I just want to clarify, we also have observation data. I don't know if you noticed, one of those PLC topics was specifically dedicated to modeling. Because we did notice that they weren't doing modeling, that they felt uncomfortable with modeling. So we did a lot of extra training. And then our marvelous state coaches pushed the modeling. They modeled with their site coaches how they did that, and they even modeled how they would do the model. So it was part of the coaching, that being able to have the hierarchy of coaching allowed our most experienced coaches to push their coachees to try some of the coaching strategies. So we were fortunate because of that. Would you say that would you explain that way too, Sue?
No, I think that's very accurate. I think, especially I'm also remember when Lisa, our PIs, shared some data midway about which coaching practices were being used and which weren't, and that really like brought it home to the coaches. Oh, I'm missing out on this great opportunity to use modeling in my coaching session, and that really seemed to bring it up as well. So the data.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you for explaining that. So what I hear you saying is that you pushed it, you gave them the know-how, you pushed it, you let them practice the know-how you didn't just train them on it, but they got chances to feel more comfortable. Because I know when I was a coach for teachers, I didn't feel comfortable modeling because I hadn't actually used the program that they were using, the curriculum they were using. I had never used it with kids before, right? And so I don't think I modeled. I gave a lot of feedback. But there was also a question from Veronica in the last minute. Sorry. Were the coaches those who had been recently in the classroom?
No. And that's because no one was working in classrooms. Remember, these were all coaches who were going to families' homes. I mean, we did have people who were in classrooms. So we had the range because there's some people who were working in schools, and then some of our site coaches worked in schools. So we had people doing all sorts of different hats, they're doing hats. They wore a lot of hats. They had a lot of different roles. They could be occupational therapists. They could be speech therapists. The range of individuals that we were working with and their backgrounds was quite broad. Now, all of them had experience with children. All of them had been in the field. All of them had training on RBI and getting ready, relative to what they were doing. But that they all had a variety of backgrounds in terms of, and so that's why. On one hand, that's why coaching is so wonderful, because we can meet people where they are to support them. That's also one of the challenges, because you can't always have a coach who matches everyone's experience.
And sorry that I took you off course, but I just wanted to, the modeling part, that's one of those things that for the last 16 years, we've found that to be true across, that it's a really impactful coaching practice. That's the least used coaching practice. So I'm glad that we got a chance to talk about that, and also understanding who these folks are. That gives us a little bit more information. So thank you for the question, Veronica. Rachel and Sue, it has been a pleasure to have you. It's so nice. We've had all three of the K-12 coaching model demonstration projects share. Now we've had our first early childhood model demonstration project share. We have one more on the way, and we've learned something different from each group. So it's been a good experience, and you can see that in the chat too. Anita, did you want to say a last word?
Just thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having us. And there's our website again if you want. Lisa Kanoki, who's the project PI's email address is there. I also included my email address. I didn't put Sue's on there because I didn't ask permission first. So
it's fair. Okay. Well, everyone have a great afternoon. Thank you, John, for organizing us. And thank you everyone for being interactive and engaged. We appreciate you.
Thanks a lot.